Hey there, viewers or viewer, whoever. In this video I'm going to be going over DNS and DHCP basics. I'm going to cover those. I'm going over both at once because they work together, so don't be overly concerned with terminology and specifics at the moment because it's all really contingent upon configuration and system state of a lot of things. So first of all, starting out with DHCP, stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, which is good because hosts are coming on the network dynamically and they need to be configured with an IP address, a subnet mask, and a gateway at the least. Now, I'd like to first start out with how DHCP maps each device to an IP address that it hands the lease out to, or who it hands the lease out to. Here is client 10 right here, client10.example.com. Alright, so let me move this down. If I bring up a command prompt and type in get MAC, it will get a physical address. Okay, that physical address is also known as a Media Access Control Address, or MAC address. It's comprised and made up of hexadecimal pairs. So each hex digit it can count from 0 to 15. So it has 16 different combinations. Each hex pair has 16 squared, 16 times 16 combinations, and that's 256. And there are 6 hex pairs. So to get the combination in 6 hex pairs, you would take 256 and raise it to the 6th power. Alright? And that is how many different combinations or permutations are available in that address. 256 to the 6th power. Alright. So these first 3 right here, these first 3 hex pairs, these are the vendor. They're vendor specific, and actually I didn't think of this before, but really didn't plan on it, but let me pull up. I have a list of vendors. Takes a couple of seconds to load because it's a large list. And for instance, here's Netgear, and here is a vendor, and they're out of San Jose. Here's the hex right here, and Hewlett-Packard, D-Link, and so on and so on. So these next 3 hex pairs are specific to the actual device that it's made. If it's on a network, it's going to have a physical address, and that physical address or MAC address is this unique ID up here in DHCP. Oops, let me put that back up at the top. This unique ID is mapped to this lease. These physical addresses are embedded in all components from the vendors, and that have to be connected to a network, usually burnt into some form of non-volatile memory like EEPROM, which by the way stands for Electronically Erasable Programmable Read-Only Memory. I just never forgot that acronym. The IP address is then mapped to that MAC address. Anyway, that's how DHCP keeps track of all the devices and the leases, which brings us to A records over here. A records are used to resolve host names. This one I'm pointing at, let's stick with client 10. It's used to map the host name, or used to resolve a host name to an IP address. Before an A record is created, now this is important, before an A record is created, the client must authenticate against the domain controller. Okay, this one right here, the primary domain controller. And then an A record is created and stored in Active Directory or a zone file, depending on whether it's Active Directory integrated DNS or a member server. but the A records are not always looked to first. There are caches and DNS Resolver caches on each client, to be specific. But before I do that, I'm going to delete that A record right there, and I mean delete that lease on DHCP, and I'm going to delete this A record over here in DNS Manager. Now I will just restart this and pause the video. Restart client 10. Alright, so client 10 restarted. It's not even logged into, and it already reached out for a lease, and there it is right there when I refreshed it. And it also authenticated against the DC, and now there is an A record entry in there. So let me log in. Okay, so with that being done, next would be the A records. Alright, we went over this and we went over that and restarted, and DHCP hand out a new lease with IP address, subnet mask, gateway to the router, a gateway address for the router, and all that. Now on to the DNS Resolver Cache. If I display that cache, this is what I'm looking for right here, dc01.example.com. Here's the A record right here. This is what allows it to resolve, at least the cache, client side, to resolve DC01 to this address right here, this IP address. Alright, now client side is more terminology for servers, domain controllers, because you would have a server side cache and a client side cache, but that's neither here nor there for this video. Now I'm going to erase that cache, flush the DNS. Now with that being flushed, there's nothing in there. If I display it, you can see that there's nothing there. Alright, so now let's ping not an IP address but client 11. I have another client open. Let me bring that over. This one, client 11, has the green background. Alright, so if I ping client 11, it will resolve that to an IP address and ping that IP address. Now let's go here, and I'm going to delete the A record. And to be absolutely comprehensive, I'll delete the lease too. Let's just delete everything except for the computer account. And let's ping client 11 again. Let's ask it to resolve, and it can resolve. That's because it's in the cache. So let me get the mouse out of the way and display that cache. You can see client 10 right here has a record in DNS Resolver Cache. But now if I flush DNS and then try to ping client 11, if we ping client 11 again, ping request could not find host client 11. Please check the name, try again. It's neither, there is no A record and it's not in the cache, and it's usually going to look to the cache first, right? So client 11 A record is gone and it cannot be pinged, or it could be pinged and then it couldn't be pinged. And so anyway, let me put focus in the window first. Do an IP config and register DNS. By the way, I'm logged in as admin on this local machine, so I can do this. It has to be an elevated command prompt. That might take some time on a large network, but right here it should just recreate that A record again, although there's a problem. And the problem is that this is client 10. So let me bring client 11 over. Must be getting tired. Alright, let me bring client 11 over now, and I'm going to need to run as admin and register DNS And now go over here to DNS Manager Console, and there it is right there. There's the A record. Now let me switch out client 11 with client 10 on the screen again. And where were we? Oh yes, ping. Alright, now let's ping client 11. Get it to resolve. There's an A record, so it should resolve, right? No, not exactly, because again, with the cache, if we display that, there's an entry right here, client 11 name does not exist. So its cached is not being able to find client 11, basically. So flush the DNS, and then ping client 11 again, and now client 11 can be resolved, that host name. And as I was saying before, without secure authentication of a client, an A record won't be created. There needs to be secure authentication. And so again, I'm going to delete, actually I won't do that, really not necessary. What I am going to do is open up AD users and computers and delete client 10. I'm going to delete that computer. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, I'm going to go, this is a good time to do this, use AD computer, get AD computer, identity of client, this is just me talking out loud, of client 10. Alright, and what I'm looking for here is the security identifier, the SID. Alright, so I'm going to copy this. Let me make sure I've shared clipboard on. Yep, alright. I'm going to copy that to a text document on the host. And now I will delete client 10, the computer account. So now that's gone from ADUC. The computer account is no longer there, and this is going to create problems due to authentication. So now let's just delete everything, or delete a few things. The lease, the A record, the computer account is already gone, and bring client 10 over here, and I'll restart it and pause the video. Alright, so client 10 is restarted again. And while that's loading, I'll go in here to DHCP console. DHCP handed out a lease. It really does not care right here in this configuration with no network policy in place who or what it hands out an address to. So at least to. It handed client 10 a lease. And you can see there are a few other devices on here, a phone and some other type of device and something. They're on they belong to the domain, but they don't have accounts. In other words, they can't be authenticated, hence that is why they don't have any A records. So I'll go over here and refresh DNS console, and the A record does not show up. So one might tend to think you could just create a new computer account, client 10, and you know what, I will create the computer account, and once that is made, I'll bring up PowerShell again and do get AD computer, take off that cap lock, and it was client 10. Alright, and copy that, open up that text document where I saved the other SID, security identifier, and notice the numbers are not the same. It just incremented by 1. This is important. That's how it identifies the computer account through that security identifier. Alright, so I'll save that just in case and close that down. And remember, client 10 did restart. It didn't get an A record. One could think I am logged in as an admin, but yet if I try to register, it already restarted, right? So if I do ipconfig switch register DNS, you would think it would just, well, we have to go over here and refresh this, and there is no A record created again. And there's a problem, like I said, because of authentication. So if I open up network connections, you can see right here in parentheses it says unauthenticated. Now there's a problem, like I said, with the secure channel, not to get too deep into it, but I'm going to open up PowerShell on this machine as an administrator. Alright, so within a local admin account, what you want to do here is, let's see, Test-ComputerSecureChannel. Luckily it's the first one, so you can just tab right to that. You don't need to or not in this scenario, I don't need to specify the server, but just for a good example I will, and I'll type out the whole FQDN there and verbose. And it says false right here. This is important, false. And the secure channel between the local computer and the domain is broken. So for this to authenticate correctly and that A record to be created, this needs to be fixed. So I don't want to type all this again, so I will stick repair in there to repair it, and we need to be prompted for credentials. So we use credential, and we don't need to worry about the administrator account because there's only one at this moment. I do need to worry about that space right there though. And for both, yeah, that's good. Alright. Alright, now it says that the secure channel was successfully repaired. So now we'll re-register this machine with DNS and go over here and refresh this, and you can see that it created the A record right there. Again, authentication is a big issue, and security identifiers to identify the computer account that was deleted and recreated again. Now let's move this out of the way and go back over here to DHCP console and look at scope options. Well, let's look at options. Alright. With this, let's also look at server options first, because this is more inclusive, more broad of a scope. Server options here, I'll just read this. Server options are additional configuration parameters that a server or a DHCP server can assign to the clients. And also down here, and it should say, yes, you can override each of these server options by defining them in scope options. So right here in scope options, underneath this scope node, we have option 3, 6, and 15, which are your basic options. You need a router, right? You need something to route. If you're routing, you need a gateway if it needs to know how to get out and address another subnet. So that, along with what the DNS server is, .1, .100, and the DNS domain name. If I take this option right here, router 3, and I delete it, and then I bring back, say this gets restarted and or goes offline, comes online again, and the address or excuse me, the lease gets renewed. Right now you can see with that option gone, default gateway is gone. And if we go back over here, and now here's how you create it, just right click there and configure options. You could type in the host name of the domain controller, resolve it, add it, say OK, and it's added back in there again. Now if I renew that, if I do ipconfig switch renew, if we do that, there is the default gateway handed out with the lease when it got renewed. So let me move that off the screen again, and let's see, I'm going to gloss over this real quick. Here's your scope node, your address pool, start IP address, end IP address, which you can specify. You can exclude some addresses in there if they might need to be static, if that is a concern, like for a printer or another server. And here are your address leases, like we've been watching, like the screen had been focused on before. Here are the reservations that I just mentioned. We briefly touched on scope options, and policies we'll get into in another video, with the focus over here in DNS Manager console. Alright, here's the forward lookup zone for DC01. By the way, you can add in other DNS servers here and manage them by right-clicking there. But anyway, this one is DC01, so it's already connected. It's just showing itself, kind of like a loopback there. So here's your forward lookup zone with the A records, and I guess now to get into Ptr records. Remember the A records they're for resolving a host name to an IP address. Well, if we go into reverse lookup zones, it's for taking the IP address and getting a host name from it. And I probably should give an example of that later, but now let's back up here for a second and go back to the forward lookup zone with the A records. Best way to describe some things here would be to create a new zone, or pretend like I'm creating a new zone, because I'm not really going to. But anyway, stub zone, I'm going to go over this in a separate video. And store zone in Active Directory integrated DNS, in other words. Primary zone and secondary zone. To explain this in fundamentals, I'd like to explain it in a way that would make sense and cover a lot of questions. And that would be to say, the main difference between primary and secondary that just extrapolates out into every question that you would have about primary and secondary is that a primary zone is a read and write zone. A secondary zone is read only. So if a primary zone is stored in Active Directory, then it will replicate the zone data with AD. And secondary zones, to get updated, they will periodically send a request to the primary, and the primary will transfer the zone data. So secondary zone data is received it could be from another secondary, but better from a primary, right? Because it's read and write, write being the key thing there. And let's see, I'll just click next here and go on explaining this. This is about replication. Since this is the only domain and at the top of the tree right now, this would be to the forest and this would be to rep out to all DCs in the domain. So I'll just leave that selected, and you would type in a zone name there, I don't care what it is, and click next. Now, secure dynamic updates. What is this all about? Alright, we have three options here. We have allow secure dynamic updates, allow both non-secure and secure, and do not allow dynamic updates. There's no way not to get technical when explaining this, at least a little bit. When secure dynamic update is being used, only the computers and users specified in an access control list can create objects in the zone. So to think more on the computer line, if a computer's in an access control list and it's given permission to update or create objects in the zone, what it's going to create is, well, I can't click on that now. Really, I don't need to. If it has that permission to create objects, one of the objects it's going to create in that zone is going to be that A record, and it will also create a Ptr record. So I'll click next there. Oh, and by the way, let me click back here. Do not allow dynamic updates. Well, if you don't allow dynamic updates, then basically the secure dynamic update allows computers in the domain that authenticate against Active Directory and update their own record to do so. And if you don't do that and say do not allow dynamic updates, there's going to be a lot more overhead and a lot more administration needed. And I'm not going to click finish there. And in reverse lookup zones, to create one of those, you pretty much have the same stuff except for the network ID and the reverse lookup zone name. I'll start here. Now say this is a 24-bit prefix, right? So it ends there. That 24-bit prefix would leave you, this would be the network side and this would be the host side, right? And it's set up simple. At least 24-bit. It could be 29 or 30, which is impractical, but yet it's 24. So what's going to follow here in this grayed out area would be a 0, and that would be the network ID. Now, you could click this, choose this radio button right here, and it's a reverse lookup zone name, and you could just take this and write over it and create your own name. Okay, let's look at this first right there with ARPA. Now, originally understood as Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now it stands for Address Routing Parameter Area. I'm sure there's some sort of backstory behind that. This IN-ADDR, you can just think of this like inverse address, because notice these octets are backwards. It's 1.168.192. But like I said, you could name that whatever you want. Anyway, I'm just going to go with the network ID. Anyway, I'm going to cancel out of this so it doesn't matter. And then click Next. And there we go with the secure dynamic updates again. And I'll just click Cancel. So to the Ptr record. All right. Here you can see there's client 10, there's client 11. Those are the only VMs that are on right now. The other things in the other leases that were handed out, those devices they don't have accounts in Active Directory. So besides the A record not being created, a Ptr record is not created. And the A record is for the, taking a client, a host name, and resolving it to an IP name, or an IP address. Now with this, it would be the reverse of that. If you needed a host name from an IP address, this would be the way to do it. So to exemplify how a Ptr is resolving or getting a host name from an IP address, opposite of an A record, then one way, at least a simple way you could do it would be, let's look right here. We have, this is client 11, and let's resolve this IP address. Let's get a host name for this IP address. And if you just did this, it would ping client 10, right? But if you use the A switch, by the way, let's just look at it here. Here's the A switch. Resolve addresses to host names. All right. So if we stick an A switch in here, attack A, then you're going to get client 10.example.com instead of just the IP address. So to recap here real quick, DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. You have a unique ID which is mapped to the lease. The unique ID is also your media access control, your MAC address, and it's also known as just a physical address. It's a burnt-in address in EEPROM in some form of non-volatile memory, and that's how it maps it to that, which brought us to the A records, and the A records are used to take a host name, resolve it to an IP address, and the Ptr records are used to take an IP address and get a host name. And then I deleted a computer account. We also looked at, first we looked at the DNS client-side cache and how that can affect things, and then deleted the computer account, looked at the security identifier for those computer accounts, making the point that the SID, the security identifier, is what Active Directory looks to identify that computer. And if you have a problem with that, to fix that, you would look at Test-ComputerSecureChannel, and you can use the repair switch along with the server switch and specify as an argument which server it is and the credentials and repair it, and then it will repair that secure channel because the SID doesn't exactly match up with the computer account anyway. Overall, it's a problem with authentication. So that's it for this video. In the next video, not the next sequential video necessarily, but in another video about DNS and DHCP, I'll go over some zone transfers in perhaps maybe a different server, not Active Directory integrated, but at least the zone transfer within separate subnets. Until then, take it easy.